The significance of capacity for political corporations to hold property ought to be noted. Of critical importance is the fact that this property does not accrue to the individual persons. Revenues raised by such corporations by the levying of taxes or the imposition of tariffs or licensing fees or by any other means becomes the property of the corporation, not of particular governments or officials or monarchs. So whoever's got children in the background, can you please mute your microphone? The political corporation, being an abstract entity, cannot enjoy the use of its property, only redistribute it among the agents through whom it exercises power and among others whom the agents are able or obliged to favour. The state is not only a political corporation capable of raising revenue and acquiring property, though it will be generally the most voracious in its appetite. One question that arises is whether the best way to describe the state is as a sovereign power. The answer depends on how one understands sovereignty. If sovereignty means supreme authority within a territory, Philpott, SEP 2003, it is not clear that sovereignty captures the nature of all states. In the United States, the American state incorporates the 50 states of the Union. So those states are not at liberty to withdraw from the Union. However, authority of the various states and state governments does limit the authority of the American state, which is unable to act unilaterally on a range of issues. To take just one example, it cannot amend the Constitution without the agreement of 2/3 of the states. Indeed, many national states find themselves constrained, not just because they exist as federated polities, but because their membership of other organizations and associations, as well as their treaty commitments, limit what they can legally do within their own territorial boundaries. Sovereignty could, on the other hand, be taken to be a matter of degree, but this would suggest that it is of limited use in capturing the nature of states and distinguishing them from other political corporations. One aspect of being a state is that sometimes considered best identified by the concept of sovereignty is its territoriality. People belong to a state by virtue of their residence within borders and states. It is argued, exercise authority over those within its geographical bounds. While it is important to recognize that states must possess territory in order to exist, they are not unique in having geographical extension. Provinces, townships, and supranational entities such as the EU are also defined by their territories. Moreover, residence within certain borders does not make the people members of that state any more than it removes them from the authority of another under whose passport they might travel. Nor is the state's capacity to control the movement of people within or across its territory essential to its being a state. For many states have relinquished that right to some degree by membership of other associations. Citizens of the EU have the right to travel to and reside in other member states. To exist, states must have a territory, but not entire control over such territory. Weber's well-known definition of the state as a body having a monopoly on the legitimate use of physical force in a given territory is also inadequate. The extent of a state's control, including its control of the means using violence, varies considerably with the state, not only legally, but also in fact. Though they are supreme corporate entities, states do not always exist in isolation and usually stand in some relation to other forms of political association beyond their territorial borders. States may belong to international organizations, such as the United Nations, or alliances such as NATO. They may be a part of a supranational associations that are loosely integrated defense and trading blocs, such as ASEAN, or more substantially integrated governmental associations, such as the EU. They might be members of international regimes, such as the International Refugee Convention, as a result of agreements they have entered into. States might also be parts of empires or operate under the sphere of influence of another more powerful state. States might exist as associated states, as was the case with the Philippines, which was from 1935 to 1946, the first associated state of the United States. The Filipino state was responsible for domestic affairs, but the US handled foreign and military matters. Even today, though in different circumstances, the foreign relations of a number of states are handled by other states in Spain, and France are responsible for Andorra, Switzerland for Liechtenstein, France for Monaco, and India for Bhutan. States can also bear responsibility for territories with the right to become states, but which have not yet and may never become states. Puerto Rico, for an example, is an unincorporated territory of the United States, whose residents are unenfranchised American citizens, enjoying limited Social Security benefits, but not subject to a federal income tax. It is unlikely to become an independent state. The state is, in the end, only one form of political association. Indeed, the range of different forms of political association and government, even in recent history, is astonishing. The reason for paying the state as much attention as it is given is that, in spite of the variety of other political forms, the most significant type of human collectivity at work in the world today. A theory of the state. According to Martin van Creveld, the state emerged because of the limitations of the innumerable forms of political organization that existed before it. The crucial innovation that made for development of the state was the idea of the corporation as a legal person, and thus of the state as a legal person. It enabled the emergence of a political entity whose existence was not tied to the existence of particular persons, such as chiefs, lords, and kings, or particular groups such as clans, tribes, and dynasties. The state was an entity that was more durable. Whether or not this advantage was what caused the state to emerge, it seems clear enough that such an entity did come into being. The modern state represents a different form of governance that was found under European feudalism, or in the Roman Empire, or in the Greek city-states. Van Creveld, The Rise and Decline of the State. Having accounted for the concept of state, however, we now need to consider what kind of theory of the state might best account for the nature of this entity. Ever since the state came into existence, political philosophers have been preoccupied with the problem of giving an account of its moral standing. To be sure, philosophers had always asked why individuals should obey the law, or what, if anything, could justify rebellion against a king or prince. But the emergence of the state gave rise to a host of new theories that have tried to explain what relationship people could have, not to particular persons or groups of persons with power or authority over them, but to a different kind of entity. To explain the emergence of the state in Europe from the 13th to the 19th centuries would require an account of many things, from the decline of the power of the church against kingdoms and principalities to the development of a new political power structures within the transformation and eventual disappearance of the Holy Roman Empire, from the disappearance of towns and city-states and extended associations like the Hanseatic League to the rise of movements of national unification. Attempts by theorists to describe the state that was emerging are as much a part of history of the state as are the political changes and legal innovations. Bowden, Hobbes, Spinoza, Locke, Montaigne, Hume, Rousseau, Madison, Kant, Bentham, Mill, Teagle, Tocqueville, and Marx were among the most insightful thinkers to offer theories of the state during the course of its emergence. Although theorizing went on well into the 20th century in the thought of Max Weber, the English plurists, various American democratic theorists, and Michael Oakeshott. They offered theories of the state in the sense that they tried to explain what it was that gave the state its point, how it was that the existence of the state made sense. To some, this meant also justifying the state, although for the most part, it was not the central philosophical concern. Normative theory, so called, is probably a relatively recent invention. The question, however, remains what theory best accounts for the state. Since there is time and space for only some suggestions rather than a full-scale defense of a new theory of the state, I shall come to the point. The theorist who best gives the best theory of the state we have so far is Hume, and any advance we might make should build on Humean's insights. That's interesting. To appreciate what Hume has to offer, we should consider briefly what the main alternatives are before turning again to Hume. We might usefully do this by posing the question in a way that Hume would have appreciated. What interest does the state serve? Among the first answers to be offered was that presented with different reasoning by Bowden and Hobbes, the interest of everyone in peace or stability or order. Each developed this answer in politically similar circumstances. Religious wars that reflected the declining power of a church trying to hold on to political influence. Both thinkers defended the conceptions of the state as absolutist, or at least highly authoritarian, to make clear that the point of the state was to preserve order in the face of challenges to the peace posed by the church or by proponents of group rights such as monarchomax. The state was best understood as the realm of the order, to be contrasted with the state of war signified by its absence and threatened by its dereliction. Crucially for both thinkers, the state had to be conceived as a single sovereign entity, whose powers were not divided or to be shared either by different branches of government or by different elements in a mixed constitution. Among the problems with this view is that it is not clear that the state is needed to secure order, nor plausible to think that divided government is possible. The concept of the state as condition in which order is possible looks unlikely, not only because the state may sometimes act in ways that are destructive of order, even self-destructive, but also because order has existed without states. Indeed, one of the problems for Hobbes' social theory in particular is explaining how the state could come into being if it really is the result of agreement voluntarily to transfer power to a corporate agent, since the state of war is not conducive to making or keeping agreements. It does not look as if the point of the state is to serve our interest in order, even if that were our sole primary interest. Another view of the point of the state is it serves our interest in freedom. Two theories of this kind were offered by Rousseau and Kant. In Rousseau's account, the emergence of society bring with it the loss of a kind of freedom, as natural man is transformed into a social being ruled directly and indirectly by others. The recovery of this freedom is not entirely possible, but freedom of a kind is possible in the state, which is the embodiment of the general will. Living in such a state, we can be free beings who are ultimately subject not to others, but to laws we give ourselves. Drawing inspiration from Rousseau's concept of freedom, Kant presents a slightly different contractarian story, but one with a similarly happy ending. The antithesis of the state is the state of nature, which is a state of lawless freedom. In that condition, all are morally obliged to contract with one another to leave that state, to enter a judicial realm in which freedom is regulated by justice, so that the freedom each can be compatible with the freedom of all. The state serves our interest in freedom by first serving our interest in justice. If Hobbes thought that whatever the state decreed was eo ipso just, Kant held that justice presupposed the existence of the state. What's difficult to see in Kant's account is why there is any obligation for anyone in the state of nature to enter a single judicial realm, rather than simply agree to abide by the requirements of morality or form different ethical communities. Why should freedom require the creation of a single judicial order? It is no less difficult to see why the state might solve the problem of freedom in Rousseau's account. If in reality there is conflict between different interests and some can prevail only at the expense of others, it seems no better than a cover-up to suggest that all interests are served equally well, since all are free when governed by laws that reflect the general will. If this is the case, the state serves our interest in freedom only by feeding us the illusion that we are free, when in fact we are subordinated to others. Hegel also thinks that our deepest interest is in freedom, but for him it can only be fully enjoyed when we live in a community in which the exercise of that freedom reflects not simply the capacity of particular wills to secure their particular interest, but the existence of an ethical life in which conflicts of interest are properly mediated and reconciled. The institution that achieves this is the state, which takes us out of the realm of particularity into the realm of concrete universality, a realm in which freedom is given a full expression because, for the first time, people are able to relate to one another as individuals. This is possible because the state brings into existence something that eluded people in a society before the state came into being, a form of ethical life in which, at last, people can feel at home in the world. The most serious challenge to Hegel's view is that offered by Marx. The state might appear to be the structure within which conflicts of interest were overcome as government by the universal class Hegel state bureaucracy acted to serve only the universal interest, but in reality, the state did no more than masquerade as the defender of the universal interest. The very existence of the state, Marx argued, was evidence that the particularity had not been eliminated and discrete interests remained in destructive competition with one another. More specifically, this conflict remained manifest in the class divisions in society, and the state could never amount to more than a vehicle for the interests of the ruling class. Freedom would be achieved not when the state was fulfilled, but when it was superseded. What is present in Marx but missing in the previously criticized theories is a keen sense that the state might not so much serve human interests in general as serve particular interests that have managed to capture it for their own purposes. This is why, for Marx, social transformation requires, first, the capture by the working class of the apparatus of the state. The cause of human freedom would be served, however, only when the conditions that made the state inevitable were overcome, scarcity and the division of labor, which brought with them alienation, competition, and class conflict. What is most persuasive in Marx's analysis in his account of the state as an institution that embodies the conflict of interests found in the world rather than as one that reconciles competing interests. What is less convincing, however, is the exception that particular interests will one day be eradicated. What is missing is any sense that the state itself has its own interests, as well as being the site through which a diverse range of interests compete to secure their own advantage. To gain an appreciation of these dimensions of the state, we need to turn, at least initially, to Hume. Hume's theory of the state does not appear conveniently in any one part of his political writings, which address a variety of issues, but not this one directly. His analysis is to be found in part in his treatise, an even smaller part of his second inquiry, in his essays and his multi-volume History of England. What can be gleaned from these writings in Hume's view of the state as an entity that emerged in history, in part because of the logic of the human condition demanded it, in part because the nature of strategic interaction between individuals made it probable, and finally because accidents of history pushed the process in one way or another. The first step in Hume's analysis is to explain how society is possible given the facts of human moral psychology suggested cooperation is unprofitable. The answer is that repeated interactions reveal to individuals the advantage of cooperating with potential future cooperators, and out of this understanding, conventions are born. The emergence of society means simultaneous emergence, therefore, of two other institutions, without which the idea of society is meaningless: justice and property. Society, justice, and property coexist, for no one of them can have any meaning without the other. What these institutions serve are human interests in prospering in a world of moderate scarcity. Interests account for the emergence of other institutions, such as law and government, although in these cases there is an element of contingency. Government arises because war, as eminent soldiers come to command authority among their men, and then extend that authority to their groups more broadly. Law develops in part as custom becomes entrenched, and is then further established when authorities in power formalize it, and judges and magistrates regularize it by setting the power of precedent. In the course of time, people become attached to the laws and even more attached to the particular authorities, both of which come to acquire lives of their own. A sense of allegiance is born. Of crucial importance in Hume's social theory is his understanding of human institutions as capable of having lives of their own. They come into the world without human design, and they develop not at the whim of any individual or by government in one place, will evolve as it responds to the interests, then shape and try and control it. The entire edifice of society will reflect not on any collective purpose or intention, but the interplay of interests that contend for preeminence. The state in this analysis is not the construction of human reason rooted in individual consent to a political settlement, nor a product of the decrees of divine providence. Even if the construction appears ever so perfect, it is simply the residue of what might anachronistically be called a Darwinian struggle. What survives is what is most fit to do so. The state in this story is a product of chance. There is nothing more than the way the political interests have settled for now the question of how power should be allocated and exercised. It would be a mistake to think that they could do simply as they pleased, as if on a whim. The facts of human psychology and the logic of strategic relations will constrain action, as will the prevailing balance of power. But chance events can bring about dramatic and unexpected changes. The important thing, however, is that for Hume, the state cannot be accounted for by referring to any deeper moral interest that humans may have, that in justice or freedom or reconciliation with their fellows. The state, like all institutions, is an evolutionary product. Evolution has no purpose, no end, and no prospect of being controlled. Hume's theory of the state is, in the end, born of a deeply pluralistic outlook. Hume was very much alive to the fact of human diversity of customs, laws, and political systems. He was also very much aware of the extent to which human society was marked by conflicts among contending interests. The human condition was always going to be one of interest conflict, and this condition was capable of palliation but resistant to cure. All human institutions had to be understood as the outcome of conflict and efforts at palliation, but not as resolutions of anything. If there are two general tendencies we might observe, Hume suggests, they are the tendency to authority and the tendency to liberty. Both elements are there at the heart of the human predicament. Authority is needed to make society possible and liberty to make it perfect. But there is no particular balance to be struck. For every point on the scale is a possible equilibrium point, each with its own advantages and disadvantages. To understand the state is to recognize that we are in this predicament and there is no final resolution. Hume's theory of the state, as I have presented, in some ways recalls the theory offered by Michael Oakeshott, which presents a modern European state as shifting uneasily between two competing tendencies. One tendency is towards what he called society as an enterprise association, a concept of the role of the state as having a purposive character, its purpose being to achieve some particular goal or goals, such as producing more economic growth and raising levels of happiness. The other tendency is towards the idea of society as a civil association, a conception of the state as having not particular purpose beyond making possible its members' pursuit of their own separate ends. The state's historical character is of an institution that has oscillated between these two tendencies, never at any time being of either one kind or the other. Hume's theory of the state shares with Oakeshott's account this unwillingness to set down a definitive or snapshot form, a picture or description of something that embodies important contradictions. Even if it seems not particularly satisfying, I suspect it's about as satisfying a portrait of the state as we can hope to get. And there is a link there for something. David, have you got anything? Can you summarize that while I grab a drink?
Yes, I would love to summarize that, and it's going to take me a couple of 3 minutes to actually summarize that. The whole point of this Shadrach Cathuthus writing this document is to give a definition of the word of a word, and that word he's given a definition of is the word state. Now, I can summarize that document into one sentence. A state is a company no different to McDonald's. That's it. That's your definition of the word state done. But Shadrach Cathuthus has taken 7 pages for that definition. And this guy's a PhD. This guy's a top boffin in his field of expertise. And he's probably one of the very, very few officers of government with a PhD. You don't get your PhD unless you've added something to the substance of the philosophy or the knowledge of that profession. You know, there are very few PhDs in the world, and a lot of these PhDs are actually people that teach in universities because they are a PhD. You know, you don't get many PhDs in government. Why on earth would you want to do that? But the point I'm trying to make here, it's taken Shadrach Cathuth's PhD 7 pages to give a definition of one word. Now, having looked at this document, I read this document with intent. This document is full, absolutely loaded with key points. And it was pointed out in, someone put it up in the text. That's another key point. Yeah, it's loaded with key points, and it's all philosophical. This is all philosophy. Philosophy is a concept in the abstract. It's an idea. It's an ideology. And is also drawn upon other people's philosophical points of view. It's loaded to death, which is why I kept it in its entirety and didn't just make an abstract from it, as I did with the Lord Chief Justice Sir Jack Beatson's PhD document. And it's long-winded, and it's a pain in the backside to read, but you've got to read it to understand it's all philosophy. It's all philosophical. It's concepts in the abstracts. A state itself, and I'll keep picking up this lighter as a prop. You can touch this lighter. It's here. It does something. It's real. You cannot touch a corporate entity. It's a philosophy. It's a name of a company written down in a ledger. That doesn't make anything of any physical substance. But it says in that document that the state has power. How can something which is of no physical substance have a power or a capability or own property? And that's why it's taken Shadrach Cathuth's 7 pages to give a definition of the word state. A state is a company no different to McDonald's. That's it at the end. But I left that in its entirety because of the difficulty that Shadrach Cathuth's PhD had to go through to give a definition of the word state. Well, it's a company, it's a corporate entity, it's a philosophy, it's a concept in the abstract. And it has got no more authority over anybody than McDonald's because it's a company. Now, Shadrach Cathuthus can give that as doctrine for the corporate entity, because we are talking about a corporate entity that is no different to McDonald's, which is a state. And that is actually doctrine. It's doctrine. Anyone at the law university can quote that and use it in his thesis for his qualification as a degree. This is absolute doctrine. You cannot defy this. No one can defy this. And that's why I kept it in its full integrity as a full document. As laborious it is to read through, it's loaded with key points on the fact that it's all philosophical bullshit. A state is not there to combine, to bring people. A state, he actually said it in one point, you know, the state is there to take away your freedom. And a state is a concept in the abstract, so you can't fucking touch it, and it's taking away your freedom. Oh my God. So damn right, this document is going in its entirety inside the affidavit, which is a commercial agreement with the state company itself. And that's why I kept it in its full integrity, even though it's a pain in the ass to read. And Amanda, bless you, my love, for actually plugging your way through that and reading through it out loud.
No problem. my pleasure. I had to get water. I was a bit parched.
Because that is a pain in the bum to read, even though I read it first time round. It was so powerful, a document with so many key points. And I've only highlighted a few of them. That this whole fucking shebanga is a concept in the abstract, a philosophy or a theory. And you can't touch it. You can't pick it up and touch it. But it's controlling the planet. Every state, every government is a state. And it's a company. It's a philosophy. and they are stealing your life in taxation. 85% of your life is tax. And they are stealing your life in fines and forfeitudes that you don't have a contractual obligation or a liability under because you don't have a contract with this company. And that's the case I won in 2013, which is Exhibit B inside this formal affidavit and therefore commercial agreement with the state itself. Now, where I tried to state earlier on that we do not have a means to hold the state liable because the judge is basically a janitor of the company, because we now have this affidavit, which is an agreement with the state company itself by the power of the fact that it is an affidavit and they've agreed to the material contents of this affidavit. Now we have a commercial means to charge them commercially for the fraud, for the malfeasance in the office, and the fact that they are willful and belligerent acts of terrorism. This is the contracts under which we can do that, and we have. I've commercially charged these people with securitized commercial liens to the tune of 1.95 billion. And there's another 30 people in the group who put commercial charges in securitized commercial liens against the MPs and the government, both in the UK and in Australia, because by being an MP, you're claiming that there is a government. He who makes the claim carries the obligation to present the material substance of that claim. The material substance of that claim is the legal and signed consents of the governed agreement. And no one has ever signed that in 800 years. Doesn't exist. So without that foundation in facts, they are liable. They are liable for criminal fraud. And this is the only means we have to hold them liable and to commercially charge them, to get back what they have fucking stolen. And that's the whole point of this affidavit. And that is a key document within this affidavit because of all the key points that are within it. It's huge. It's massive. So I kept it in its entirety and its integrity as the whole 7 pages to serve that function.
And certainly needing to be read many times over to really understand what it's saying.
Yeah.
Certainly
There's a lot in that document. There's a lot of key points in that document.